In the vastness of the galaxy, there was a growing tension between the old powers of the Galactic Confederation and the uncharted frontier that had become a new horizon for humanity for centuries. The Confederation ruled with an iron fist, establishing a complex web of alliances, treaties, and unspoken rules that were feared by countless species across the stars. They believed themselves untouchable. Their grip on the universe was absolute until the day the signal came without warning. It was a transmission so brief it almost went unnoticed at first. No warning, no fanfare, no indication it would change the course of galactic history. The signal arrived through the most secure channel, one only used for high-level communication within the Confederation, a secure relay intended for communications from long-forgotten allies. It was decoded and examined, but it made no sense. The message was simple yet somehow profound, a single word, Fukoff, broadcast in every known language, simultaneously. No explanation, no context, just a single word floating in the void. At first, the Council of the Galactic Confederation dismissed the transmission as a mistake, perhaps a rogue transmission, or even a technical malfunction, something that didn't warrant a response. After all, the Terrans were still a fledgling species in the galactic community. They hadn't even come close to mastering interstellar politics, and their fleet was laughable by comparison to the mighty fleets of the Confederation. The humans were seen as a curiosity, an insignificant species on the edge of the galaxy, a people who still fought among themselves and barely understood the vastness of the cosmos. But then something strange began to happen. Other systems began reporting similar signals, mysterious flashes of interference across the galaxy that echoed the same message. At first, it was sporadic, just a few isolated occurrences. But as the weeks passed, the messages began to grow more frequent, and their reach expanded. The Terrans were sending the message everywhere, through every system, a message that was impossible to ignore. It didn't take long before the Confederation's military command took notice. Something that should have been trivial was now becoming a problem. The generals and admirals of the Confederation's fleets exchanged worried glances as reports flooded in of strange Terran vessels appearing at the edges of their space. These ships were unremarkable in appearance at first glance, no advanced technology, no weaponry that would strike fear into the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful fleets. But their audacity, their refusal to conform to the standard methods of communication, sent ripples of unease through the ranks. Soon after the transmission spread, another unsettling development occurred. Terran ships began to appear near critical locations in the galaxy, places of trade and diplomatic significance. One by one, these ships arrived with their simple insignia proudly displayed on their hulls, ships that were clearly human but not bound by the laws of galactic diplomacy. They didn't ask permission to enter, they didn't seek approval from any authority. The message was clear to anyone who had the courage to understand it. Fukoff, they were not here to ask for permission or to negotiate. They were here because they could be here, because they were Terran. The Confederation tried to communicate, but the Terrans ignored them completely. Instead, the ships continued to traverse the galaxy, bringing with them nothing but that same cryptic message, Fukoff. Back on Earth, the unexpected messages sent from the Terran fleet had reached the highest levels of command, and soon after the mysterious transmission had gained the attention of the entire human leadership, the Council of Earth met in secret to discuss the rapidly escalating situation and decide how to respond to a universe that seemed to view them as little more than an afterthought. The word Fukoff had become synonymous with humanity's first defiant act on the galactic stage, a word that had stirred up confusion, fear, and a strange sense of anticipation across the galaxy. The Terran government had long been aware of the hostile and complex nature of the galaxy. They knew that their species was young and vulnerable in comparison to the mighty empires that had existed for eons. They were outsiders in a universe where the laws of diplomacy were governed by power and long-standing traditions, where any race without strength was quickly forgotten. But humanity had one weapon. None of the ancient civilizations had ever truly prepared for a weapon that was as simple as it was dangerous. The human spirit, a relentless drive to survive at all costs, to carve a place in the stars no matter the odds. And so the government activated the Fukoff Protocol, a classified initiative that had been years in the making. It wasn't a military strategy, it was a philosophy, one that took the chaotic and often unpredictable nature of humanity's existence and turned it into an advantage, a strategy born from the understanding that the universe's grand powers had grown so complacent they had forgotten what it was like to be a young and desperate species. They had forgotten what it was like to have nothing but sheer will to survive. The Fukoff protocol had no rules, it had no boundaries, and it was designed with one purpose: to make the galaxy acknowledge humanity's presence by any means necessary. There would be no formal speeches, no grand displays of diplomacy. There would be no submission or bowing to the will of others. Terrans would meet every encounter with total disregard for what was expected, and in doing so they would force the galaxy to rethink its entire perception of who they were. Humans had always been pioneers, explorers who didn't hesitate to push the boundaries of the unknown, and this was no different. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. As the protocol was enacted, Terran leaders ordered the fleet to deploy immediately, but they didn't deploy like the others who carefully measured every move. No, the Terran fleet would move with the speed and unpredictability of a comet through the night sky. They would appear where they were least expected and demand answers where no one dared to question the old ways. Their strategy was to unsettle their enemies by forcing them into positions where negotiation was impossible, by attacking their very perception of control. The first step was simple. The human fleet began to move through key star systems that had long been considered untouchable places, where only the most powerful empires dared to tread with respect and fear. Terran ships appeared in the shadows of these systems without warning and without a request for permission. Their message was not one of diplomacy or conquest, it was one of disruption. They were here, and they weren't leaving anytime soon. The Confederate leadership was stunned. Their ships were not equipped for this kind of encounter. No one had ever dared enter their territory with such casual audacity. The fleets were used to making calculated moves and acting in the name of order, but the Terran presence threw their entire way of thinking into disarray. It wasn't just the technology that made them nervous, it was the manner in which humanity was forcing the galaxy to acknowledge them as equals. As the Terran fleet pushed deeper into galactic space, the response from the Confederation was one of pure confusion and unease. It was not simply the human ships that caused concern, but the ripple effect they left in their wake. The galaxy had always operated under a delicate balance, a balance that relied on established powers and a sense of predictability. When the Terrans arrived with nothing but their audacity and a simple yet disruptive message, Fukoff, that balance shattered like glass dropped from a great height. For decades, the Galactic Confederation had prided itself on being the dominant force in the stars. Each member race was known for its strengths, its culture, and its power. The Confederation was an alliance of civilizations that had learned how to rule through diplomacy, coercion, and sheer force where might made right, and history was written by the powerful. But when the humans arrived, they didn't just challenge the might of the Confederation, they shattered its very perception of control. They didn't play by any of the rules that had been set in place by the galaxy's most powerful forces. Terran ships did not approach with the formalities that were customary in galactic diplomacy. Instead, they appeared without warning, without sending messages of intent or requests for permission. They were simply there as though they belonged, and yet they didn't belong. They didn't acknowledge the authority of the Galactic Confederation or any of its allies. Instead, they appeared like living storms of unpredictability that could strike at any moment and disappear just as quickly, leaving only uncertainty in their wake. The Confederation quickly found itself scrambling for answers. No one had expected this kind of resistance, not from a species so young and unknown. The human ships were primitive in comparison to the fleets of the Confederation's most powerful allies. Their weapons were less refined, their technology seemingly underdeveloped compared to the vast warships and battle cruisers that ruled the stars. But it wasn't their firepower that terrified the galaxy's elite. It was the sheer audacity of their presence. The fact that humanity was unafraid to step into their territory and claim it as their own. As the Terran fleet continued to cut through the galaxy's core systems, they left behind a trail of confusion. The Confederation's vast networks of intelligence reported strange occurrences. Ships unable to track the movements of Terran vessels, communications cut off with no explanation, fleets left scrambling without any clear understanding of what was happening. One by one, key systems fell into the hands of the Terran fleet without a single shot fired or battle waged. Instead, the human ships employed tactics that were alien to every other species. They disrupted communications, scrambled sensor data, and created chaos among fleets simply by existing in places where no one had ever dared to enter before. One by one, other galactic empires were forced to take notice of the Terran advance. Even races known for their fierce independence and power began to question the stability of their own dominion. What if the Terrans weren't just a passing threat? What if they were more than just a single fleet roaming the stars? What if humanity was a force that could not be controlled because they didn't follow the rules? That was the question that began to take root in the minds of the Galaxy's leaders, the question that would haunt them as the Terran fleet surged forward and claimed more space than any of them ever thought possible. By the time the Confederation's military command decided to react, it was already too late. The Terrans had already sent their message loud and clear, and now they were moving with an unstoppable momentum. Their ships and their message had become synonymous across the galaxy. Fukoff was not just a declaration. It was a statement of intent, a statement that humanity would no longer be ignored. The first true test of humanity's audacity came when the Terran fleet encountered the Korgath Empire, a race known for their ruthless tactics and near-legendary warships. The Korgath were a force to be reckoned with, a species who prided themselves on their fearsome military strength and long-standing dominance over their sector of the galaxy. They had crushed countless foes throughout history, and their reputation for brutality preceded them. Wherever they traveled, no one had ever dared challenge the Korgath without paying the price. But as the Terran fleet emerged from the deep reaches of the galaxy and into Korgath-controlled space, the message was clear. They didn't come to negotiate or even to show respect. They came to face down the Korgath and demand their place in the stars. The Korgath were not used to this kind of behavior. They expected their enemies to cower before them, not to march into their domain with such unshakable confidence. When the Terran fleet entered the Korgath system, they didn't even send a formal communication to the Empire's high command. No warning, no message of surrender or negotiation, no show of force or intimidation. Just a simple arrival of human ships, as if they had every right to be there. The Korgath did not respond kindly. The Korgath fleet quickly mobilized their forces, launching a series of coordinated strikes against the Terran ships. The first battle began with all the expected brutality of a Korgath assault. Massive warships of Korgath design filled the skies, launching devastating weapons in a coordinated effort to wipe out the human presence. But what the Korgath had failed to account for was the sheer unpredictability of humanity's tactics. Unlike any enemy they had ever faced, the Terrans didn't engage in traditional battle maneuvers. They didn't rely on heavy artillery or brute force. Instead, they relied on something far more dangerous. Their fleet employed highly unorthodox tactics, splitting up into small groups and scattering across the battlefield, utilizing advanced cloaking technology to vanish and reappear with the precision of ghosts. Each Terran ship moved with uncanny speed and precision, making it nearly impossible for the Korgath to predict their next move. While the Korgath focused all their efforts on locking onto the largest Terran ships, they were blindsided by the human fleet's unpredictability. The Terrans didn't play by the rules, and that was their greatest advantage. In a battle of sheer numbers, the Korgath should have emerged victorious. But the Terrans didn't fight like any enemy the Korgath had ever faced. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The battle dragged on for hours as the Korgath fleet struggled to adapt to the lightning-fast Terran attacks. It was clear that the Terrans weren't just fighting for territory or dominance. They were fighting to show that they belonged and that they could hold their own against anyone who dared to challenge them. By the time the battle ended, the Korgath had suffered a humiliating defeat. It wasn't a total annihilation, but it was enough to send shockwaves through their military command. The Korgath Empire's reputation for invincibility was shattered. The Terran fleet hadn't just beaten them. They had done so with ingenuity and an unwillingness to conform to traditional warfare. The Korgath, once considered one of the galaxy's most fearsome forces, had been made to look weak and ineffective in the face of the human uprising. As the Korgath withdrew and regrouped, they were left to ponder the impossible question: how could a species so young and inexperienced in galactic warfare defeat them so decisively? And that question echoed across the galaxy, because now the galaxy knew that the Terrans weren't just a random anomaly. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they were not going anywhere. As the Terran fleet continued its campaign, the ripple effects of their defiance spread like wildfire across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the dominant powers of the Confederation were left questioning everything they thought they knew about power, control, and the balance of the universe. The Terrans were not just disrupting space, they were disrupting the very foundation of the galactic order, and no one was prepared for the shockwaves that would follow. The first sign that the galaxy's power dynamics were shifting came when multiple galactic systems began to experience internal unrest. As news of the Terran fleet's bold actions spread, dissident factions and rebel groups, many of whom had long been suppressed by the Confederation and other powers, began to stir. The idea that a species had dared to challenge the galactic giants inspired a new wave of resistance movements, each one more emboldened than the last. One by one, previously obedient star systems, some under the control of the Confederation, some governed by long-established powers, began to question their own subjugation. The status quo, it seemed, was no longer an unquestioned truth. The Terrans had shown them that even the smallest and most insignificant species could rise against the oppressive tides of the galaxy, forcing the inhabitants of these systems to reconsider their own place in the universe. In one particularly volatile region, a coalition of smaller, previously disregarded races, inspired by the Terran example, began to challenge their more powerful neighbors as human ships passed by their systems. Bearing the insignia of the Terran fleet, they knew the message was not just a challenge to the Confederation. It was a declaration of independence for any species daring to dream of a better future. The Confederation, sensing the danger to their control, quickly attempted to suppress these uprisings with force, but the Terrans had already set something in motion, a spark that was now becoming an uncontrollable fire. The rebellion wasn't just about fighting the Confederation's military. It was about fighting the notion that one group of races should dominate the galaxy, and that the smaller, lesser species had no place in the larger cosmic order. As the galaxy's powerhouses attempted to quash the growing unrest, they found themselves struggling with an unexpected force of nature, the human willingness to spread their influence, not by conquering, but by inspiring others. The Terrans had shown that they could bend the galaxy's rules, forcing even the most rigid powers to question their own practices. The ripple effects of their defiance were creating fractures in the old system that could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the Terran fleet continued to assert its dominance with unparalleled confidence. The simple yet potent message of Fukoff was now synonymous with their arrival in every new system. They entered no longer just a declaration of intent. The word had become a symbol of human resolve, a banner under which all those who longed for freedom from the Confederation's tyranny gathered. In the past, they had been voiceless, their cries unheard, but now, emboldened by the Terran presence, they had found the courage to stand up for themselves. Even races that had once viewed the Terrans as an insignificant nuisance began to change their tune. Some chose to negotiate, seeking alliances with the humans. Others, however, refused to believe that this small race from the edge of the galaxy could pose a true threat, only to find themselves wrong when their fleets were outmaneuvered or forced to retreat in humiliating fashion. The more the Terrans pushed, the more the galaxy's established powers realized that their dominance was being eroded by the sheer force of humanity's will. Across the stars, the balance of power was tipping. Slowly but surely, the Confederation, once a shining beacon of unity and strength, was now seeing cracks form in its once impenetrable facade. The Terrans, with their relentless boldness and unyielding spirit, had proven that nothing, not even the most established and powerful forces, was beyond challenge. As the Terran fleet surged forward through the galaxy, leaving shattered reputations and broken empires in its wake, it became clear to the galaxy's most powerful races that humanity was not simply a passing threat. They were something new, something terrifying in the past. Wars had been fought with calculated strategies and well-established doctrines, but humanity's unpredictability had thrown everything into chaos. No one knew how to prepare for what the Terrans might do next. Their tactics were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, and that made them all the more dangerous. The Terran fleet's technology was far more advanced than anyone had originally believed, and though their ships might have seemed underwhelming at first glance, they possessed capabilities that far outstripped anything the Confederation or any of the galactic powers had expected. Humanity's engineers and scientists had developed revolutionary technologies that were not only powerful but adaptive and versatile. These innovations were applied in ways no one else would have thought possible. One of the most shocking aspects of the Terran fleet was the self-evolving nature of their warships. The ships were not static or bound to a single set of specifications. They could adapt and grow with every encounter. Learning from the battles they fought, the longer the Terrans fought, the more efficient and dangerous their ships became as the human fleet advanced. Each ship's capabilities improved by leaps and bounds. Sometimes, even during battle itself, the sheer unpredictability of their technology was a nightmare for their enemies who couldn't rely on standard counters or tactics. The Terrans did not simply fight with firepower. They fought with ingenuity. They used gravity fields to distort enemy ship movements and made clever use of star formations to create false signatures, tricking entire fleets into firing on decoy signals. The Terran ship's ability to manipulate the environment around them left their enemies guessing, unable to predict their next move. And it wasn't just the technology that made them terrifying. It was the way humanity operated on a collective level. Their commanders were a mix of seasoned strategists and brilliant innovators, unafraid to abandon tradition in favor of gut instinct. The Korgath Empire, once so sure of their invincibility, found themselves facing another wave of Terran fleets coming from unexpected directions, launching seemingly random strikes against key targets with surgical precision. In every engagement, the Korgath found themselves unable to mount an effective defense, not because they lacked the power or resources, but because the humans refused to engage on their terms instead. The Terrans struck hard and fast, with a strange and terrifying combination of chaos and order, leaving their enemies constantly off balance. It wasn't just the Korgath Empire that felt the impact of the Terran advance. The Confederation's strongest and most powerful allies began to take notice. As well, the once unimpeachable alliances between races began to fray as old tensions resurfaced. The thought of facing the Terran fleet sent waves of fear throughout the Galactic Council. The idea that such a young species could push so far so quickly was a concept that was almost impossible to comprehend. Even the Confederation's most advanced and heavily fortified fleets struggled to gain the upper hand against the Terrans, who didn't just rely on overwhelming strength. They relied on cunning, unorthodox strategies and a profound belief in their own right to exist within the stars. The Terran fleet was relentless, but not reckless. Every move was calculated to disrupt and destabilize the status quo, making it harder and harder for the other galactic powers to maintain control. The Confederation scrambled to rally their forces, sending emissaries and envoys to try and find a solution that didn't involve total annihilation. But each message they sent was met with silence. The Terrans were not interested in negotiations. Their message had been clear from the beginning. We are here, and we will not back down. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity unleashed its full might, and as the Terran fleet surged forward like an unstoppable tide, it became clear that the old order was no longer in control. The Terrans had come to claim their place in the stars, and they would not be denied. As the Terran fleet continued its unrelenting advance through the galaxy, the greatest powers of the Confederation realized that something had to be done. A new solution was devised, a weapon of unimaginable power, the ancient artifact, known only as the Singularity Core. The artifact had been discovered millennia ago by a long-extinct race that had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. But after their fall, the core had been sealed away by the Confederation as a last resort weapon, capable of altering the very fabric of space-time itself. Its power was so great that it could theoretically give the wielder control over the movements of entire star systems or obliterate them in an instant. When the Terrans breached the Confederation's outermost borders and continued their unyielding march toward the heart of galactic power, the decision was made to activate the Singularity Core. It was a final gamble, a desperate attempt to stop the human advance before it could destroy everything the Confederation had built with the power of the core. The Confederation hoped to bend time and space to their will and crush the Terran fleet before they could bring further devastation. The deployment of the Singularity Core was shrouded in secrecy, known only to a select few within the highest levels of the Confederation leadership and military. The artifact was mounted on an enormous battle station and transported to the heart of the galaxy, where it was prepared to deliver its devastating power. It was a weapon unlike anything the Terrans had ever faced, an ancient, godlike device that could warp reality itself, and yet, even as the weapon was activated, the Terran fleet kept pushing forward, undeterred, as though they had known all along that this moment would come. The battle that ensued was unlike any other. The Confederation unleashed the full fury of the core, bending space-time around the Terran fleet in an attempt to trap them or rip them apart. Entirely, the space around the Terran ships twisted into strange and impossible shapes as time itself warped and buckled. The core sent shockwaves through the galaxy, and entire sectors of space seemed to collapse in on themselves. It was as if the universe itself had been cracked open, and the forces of gravity and energy swirled together in an endless chaotic dance. But the Terrans were not so easily undone. They had expected something like this, and the fleet had already prepared for the worst. The human ships, designed for adaptability and resilience, had been equipped with technology capable of resisting the effects of the Singularity Core. They moved with uncanny precision, slipping through rips in space-time and avoiding the devastating blasts of warped energy that erupted around them. The Confederation's fleet struggled to keep up with the Terran vessels, whose movements seemed to defy logic itself. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Terrans were not only surviving but thriving in the chaos. They had no fear of the unknown, no hesitation in facing down the impossible. Instead, they adapted to the storm of destruction, learning with every passing moment, becoming stronger as the battle progressed. The Confederation had underestimated them in the worst way. With each pulse of the Singularity Core, the Terran fleet's determination only grew stronger. They fought not for glory or control, but for their place in the stars, and nothing, not even the most powerful weapon the galaxy had ever seen, could make them back down. The Confederation's weapon, powerful as it was, could not break the resolve of a species that had learned to survive against impossible odds. In the end, the Confederation was forced to acknowledge a hard truth. The Terrans were no longer an unknown force. They were the future of the galaxy. The Singularity Core had failed, and the Terran fleet stood unbroken and stronger than ever, as the Confederation's most prized weapon fizzled out in the face of humanity's resilience. The aftermath of the battle against the Singularity Core was nothing short of seismic. The Confederation's most powerful weapon had failed to stop the Terran fleet, and instead had only strengthened the resolve of humanity to carve its place in the galaxy. The damage to the Confederation's reputation was irreparable. In the wake of the conflict, the galaxy was left reeling, trying to process the overwhelming fact that a species once thought insignificant had now shattered the established order. Humanity's victory was not just a military conquest, it was a profound shift in the galactic balance of power. The Terran fleet, having faced down the impossible and emerged victorious, now stood as the de facto force that could no longer be ignored. They had not just fought for survival. They had fought to stake their claim as equals among the stars, and their victory proved that they had every right to be there. The message sent across the galaxy was clear. We are Terran, and we will not be overlooked. The Confederation, its once proud fleets crippled and its leaders in disarray, was forced to acknowledge the new reality. Their diplomatic envoys reached out to humanity, not with demands or threats, but with offers of peace and negotiation. They had no choice. The once unshakable empire had crumbled under the weight of humanity's unpredictability and resilience. The galaxy had learned that the Terrans did not bow, did not ask for permission, and certainly did not submit to the will of those who sought to dominate them. In the months that followed, a new treaty was forged in the wake of humanity's victory. A treaty that recognized Terran sovereignty and their place in the galactic order. The Confederation, in a desperate attempt to save face, allowed humanity to claim what was rightfully theirs. The humans had not just taken control. They had demanded a seat at the table of galactic powers, not through force alone, but through the unrelenting force of their will and their refusal to accept anything less. As the treaty was signed, the leaders of the galactic powers found themselves grappling with the truth. Humanity had changed everything. They had shown that the old rules of diplomacy and warfare no longer applied. The galaxy was now faced with a new reality, where the status quo had been shattered, and everything was up for grabs. Yet even as they were acknowledged as a powerful force, humanity did not seek to dominate. The Terrans had never been driven by the thirst for power or conquest. Rather, they sought to build, to explore, and to protect what was theirs. Their legacy was one of resilience, of standing tall in the face of impossible odds, and of showing the galaxy that they were capable of achieving greatness on their own terms. The Terran fleet, still undefeated and stronger than ever, continued to explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy. They formed new alliances with those who understood that humanity could not be dismissed. They shared knowledge, resources, and technology with those who sought peace and prosperity, but stood firm against anyone who threatened their newfound freedom. The Terrans did not need to conquer. They simply needed to exist, and in doing so, they forced the entire galaxy to adapt to their presence. The once quiet species at the edge of the galaxy had become a cornerstone of its future. The name Terran was no longer a whisper in the dark corners of space. It was a symbol of strength, determination, and defiance, a symbol of a species that had come from nothing, and through sheer will had changed the very fabric of the universe forever. And in the stars, humanity had found its rightful place.